Welcome to the Little Bighorn Map Battle. This is part 5 in our series of 6 videos, and I am Bill Smith, your narrator for the series. And now let's get back to the maps and continue on with the unfolding events of June 25th and June 26th, 1876. We have moved off to the west some more, and to avoid confusion, I have flipped the map on its side for a better view. The previous 4 maps followed the correct directions of north top of the page, south bottom of the page, east right of the page, and west left of the page. Since I have flipped the map on its side, the directions are different now. North is to the left of the page, south is to the right of the page, east is to the top of the page, and west is to the bottom of the page. Now we can finally see the Little Bighorn Valley. We have the North Fork of Reno Creek at the top of the page, and we also have Reno Creek. Fort A can finally be seen here, the confluence of the Little Bighorn River and Reno Creek. The Little Bighorn River flows from right to left in a south to north direction. We also have the broad and open Little Bighorn Valley. The far bluff of the valley is called the Benchland, and this is where the Indian scouts at the Crow's Nest earlier in the day located the pony herd. The southern end of the Indian village is to the north of Fort A in the valley. The timber fight location is located south of the Indian village along the river. And we also have the Reno Retreat Ford, which is south of the timber fight location. Reno Hill is the high ground on the southern end of the bluffs across the Little Bighorn River. Weir Point is located to the northern end of the bluffs across the Little Bighorn River. Cedar Coulee is located between the bluffs and high ground to the east, and that high ground is called Sharpshooter Ridge. Now, unlike the previous 4 maps, this map overlaps a little. The entire upper right corner of this map was also featured on map 4. Because the 2 maps overlap a bit, there will be a few early movements that repeat. Therefore, unlike the first 4 maps where the combatants appeared on an empty map, this map will start in the middle of the action with the combatants in the midst of their movements. So let's get to the first map and continue on with this event. As you can see, we have a lot of activity around Fort A. Reno and the Indian Scouts have caught up with some of the Indians that they have been chasing since the lone teepee. There has been some firing at the ford, resulting in the first casualty and fatality of the Battle of the Little Bighorn, a warrior named Deeds. While Reno is at Fort A, Custer's battalion can be seen to the east at North Fork watering his horses. The Company F detail has already been detached by Custer and is currently making its way north up to the bluffs. Reno has dispatched his first courier, Private Archibald Michaelarchy, to Custer about the unfolding situation. As Michaelarchy reaches Custer at North Fork, Reno dispatches a second courier, Private John Mitchell, with more information. The Company F detail by this time has reached the bluffs and views the Indians in the valley fleeing north toward the Indian village. At the same time, Reno has begun to move out from Fort A. Custer departs North Fork, meeting Private John Mitchell prior to his reaching the bluffs. Reno continues to move north down the valley toward the Indian village, which now is in sight. And as you can see, Custer and Reno continue to move north, Custer on the bluffs, Reno in the valley. Custer passes Reno Hill, moves along the bluffs a little, and then shuffles his battalion into Cedar Coulee behind the bluffs to wait and rest while he and his staff remain on the bluffs to observe Reno's actions, as well as to recon the Indian village. Custer expects Reno to charge into the village, or at the very least part of it. But Reno pulls up and forms a skirmish line around 3:15 p.m. and begins firing into the southern end of the Indian village. Indian warriors begin to come out to challenge the soldiers while non-combatants flee to the north away from the attack. At this point, Custer dispatches Sergeant Daniel Knipe of Company C at 3:15 p.m. with verbal orders to locate the pack train and to walk it up to the battlefield. The ammunition will be needed. As you can see, the warrior presence against Reno continues to grow. Some warriors remain in Reno's front, while others move along the river, and still others climb the benchland to secure horses for the battle. Custer and his staff continues to view Reno's situation in the valley. The warriors are coming out to meet Reno, a tactic Custer expected. The non-combatants are fleeing to the north away from Reno, another tactic that Custer expected. But this second situation places Custer in a bad position. The entire goal of the campaign is to capture the Indians and to bring them back to the Indian reservation, not to kill everyone on sight. The best way to do this is to capture the non-combatants. If you hold the families hostage, the warrior force will stop fighting. With the women and children fleeing away from a static Reno, their escape is a very real danger to the army. To prevent their escape, Custer has no choice but to chase after the non-combatants. He must move off to the north. But he also does not want to go into terrain without some security. Custer decides to send the Company F detail off to the north to get a look at the situation and terrain there. The detail will establish a secure rendezvous point for the battalion before the battalion is moved forward. And as you can see, we now have the Company F detail being detached from the battalion and riding north down Cedar Coulee toward Medicine Tail Coulee. Sergeant Knipe continues to ride along the bluffs toward Reno Creek. And now we have Boston Custer appearing on the map, moving west in Reno Creek toward the bluffs. Custer and his staff departs the bluffs at 3:31 p.m. Reno continues to take fire from the warriors. Slowly the warriors begin to move around Reno's open left flank. Boston Custer by this time has made the right turn and has begun to climb the bluffs. As he does so, he passes Sergeant Knipe, who is on his way to the pack train. Custer and his staff returns to the battalion in Cedar Coulee. The Company F detail, which is off the map to the north or to the left, has reached high ground on the far side of Medicine Tail Coulee and ascertained the position and situation is safe, so they wave the Custer battalion forward. At once, Custer begins to move down Cedar Coulee toward Medicine Tail Coulee. Now we have Sergeant Knipe moving off the bluffs. As Boston rides north along the bluffs toward Cedar Coulee, he views Reno's engagement in the valley. As for Reno, he has been fighting on the skirmish line for 15 minutes now. The fighting has resulted in 4 fatalities for the cavalry. Private John E. Armstrong and Private John J. McGinnis were killed early in the fighting on the skirmish line. Private George E. Smith and Corporal Otto Hegeman were killed just before Company M pulled back into the timber. The Indians likewise took casualties. The fire from the skirmish line had killed at least 10 non-combatants in the village. The warrior Two-Bear likewise was killed in the village at the beginning of the skirmish line battle, while 2 other warriors, Dog with Horns and Young Black Moon, were killed later on while fighting against the skirmish line. When Reno formed the skirmish line at 3:18 p.m., all 3 companies were in line. Company G was closest to the timber, Company A was in the middle, and Company M was on the left. Most of the led horses were moved into the timber for their safety. Shortly after the formation of the skirmish line, Reno pulled Company G off the line and moved it into the timber after hearing rumors of warriors there. Reno leaves the line in the command of his adjutant, 2nd Lieutenant Benjamin Hubert Hodgson. Why Reno didn't assign the line command to the second highest ranking officer and wing commander, Captain Thomas French of Company M, is anyone's guess. Clearly Hodgson doesn't control the line. Company A has been split into its 2 platoons, with the company commander, Captain Miles Moylan, commanded 1 platoon, while the executive officer, 1st Lieutenant Charles Camillus DeRudio, commands the other. Moylan pulls his platoon off the skirmish line to check on the horses in the timber soon after Company G leaves the skirmish line. Lieutenant DeRudio's platoon, based on his testimony at the Reno Court of Inquiry in 1879, just leaves the field, and it joins the other cavalry units in the timber. No orders were given to either stay on the line or to redeploy. Company M on the extreme left of the line now finds themselves out in the open and alone. The warrior force continues to move around the left and even begins to threaten the rear. Captain French orders his men to wheel back to the right toward the trees. Company M reaches the trees at 3:33 p.m. and the Indians surround the area. As the fighting in the valley continues, Custer reaches Medicine Tail Coulee. At 3:38 p.m., Custer dispatches Trumpeter John Martin with a written message to Captain Benteen. The captain is yet to reappear, and Custer knows that he will need Benteen's men and more ammunition from the pack train. The written message reads, "Benteen, come on, big village, be quick, bring packs." Boston Custer enters Cedar Coulee as Trumpeter Martin moves up the coulee. Both pass each other, waving their hats as they go by. And now we have Boston Custer entering Medicine Tail Coulee and leaving the map. Martin continues to move along the bluffs and ride down into Reno Creek in search for Benteen. Meanwhile, the fighting in the timber continues to rage. Despite being disorganized, the cavalry is using the trees to negate the superior number of warriors surrounding them. Private George Lawrence is so far the only casualty in the timber, and he is wounded but still alive. Major Reno, who has never fought against Indians before, is unsure of what to do next. It is clear that since the disintegration of the skirmish line some 20 minutes earlier, no effect has been made by Reno to re-establish a clear command presence in the timber. The warriors are likewise dealing with their own frustrations. Reno is surrounded, but is still close enough to the village to be a threat. The warriors can't seem to get the soldiers out of the woods. They even try burning the vegetation around the timber, but due to the recent rains, the vegetation is wet and does not catch fire. It only smokes, concealing the soldier position even more effectively. As the firing continues in the woods, Reno meets up with Bloody Knife, Custer's favorite Indian scout and friend. Reno is asking Bloody Knife what he thinks the warriors are going to do next when all of a sudden Bloody Knife is shot in the head and killed. Blood and brains splatter all over Reno's face and he completely loses control. He sends out contradictory orders to anybody within earshot of him. He tells his men to mount, then dismount, then mount again. Finally he utters, "Those of you who wish to make your escape, follow me." At that, he tears out of the woods, fleeing toward the 4-day crossing. Anybody that hears the so-called order mounts and follows. Many more didn't hear anything and were left in the woods. This included 2nd Lieutenant Benjamin Hubert Hodgson, Reno's adjutant. So the warriors could not get the troops out of the timber no matter what they did, but Reno gives them a gift and comes out of the woods on his own volition. Other soldiers follow, in 2s and in 3s, spilling out of the woods from different positions. No order is given to the maneuver, no flankers or rear guard is set, making the soldiers incredibly vulnerable. Reno's main objective is to reach 4-day. However, the pursuing warriors cut off that avenue of retreat, deflecting the soldiers toward the river just south of the timber. The soldiers flee with warriors swarming all around them. Private Lawrence, who has already been wounded in the timber, is dispatched as he makes his escape from the woods. The civilian scout Charlie Reynolds, the Dakota Sioux interpreter Isaiah Dorman, and the commander of Company G, 1st Lieutenant Donald McIntosh, are all shot down as they try to make it to the river, as well as Sergeant Miles F. O'Hara, Sergeant Edward Botzer, and U.S. Indian Scout Bobtail Bull. The soldier retreat is not without complete defense, however. Many did fight back and fire at the Indians. The warriors took casualties because of this. The warriors Hawkman, Swift Bear, Chased by Owls, and White Buffalo were all killed during Reno's retreat to the river. The unorganized retreat reaches the Little Bighorn River where more men die. 2nd Lieutenant Benjamin Hubert Hodgson is shot crossing the river, dying on the east bank. Private Elihu F. Clear, orderly for 2nd Lieutenant Luther Rector Hare, and civilian contract surgeon James Madison DeWolf are killed while climbing the bluffs to Reno Hill. In all, Reno loses 30 men in the entire event, and over a dozen men are still trapped in the woods, hiding in the underbrush, and feared dead. The warriors also suffer at the crossing. Little Whirlwind was killed on the west bank of the river. Roman Nose had crossed the river but was shot and killed on the east bank of the river near where Lieutenant Hodgson fell. White Eagle was killed while climbing the bluffs, and Elk Stands on Top was killed while fighting near Reno Hill. Later on in the day, Breechcloth was killed on the east side of Reno Hill. Not counting non-combatants, the warriors had lost 13 men in the fighting up to this point. While Reno is attempting to break the land speed record on his race to the bluffs, Captain Bentine finally appears on the map. The captain has been slowly moving down Reno Creek despite the firing heard in the distance and despite the fact that he had verbal orders to move quickly and rejoin the command. Trumpeter Martin has reached Bentine just west of the lone teepee at 4:02 p.m. and has delivered Custer's written message. Bentine finally speeds up, nearing the Little Bighorn River around 4:20 p.m. As Bentine crosses North Fork, he discovers a divide in the trail. One goes toward Fort A, the other turns right and goes up to the bluffs. Bentine is not sure which trail to follow. He was not aware that the command had divided. For reasons unknown, Bentine failed to ask Martin, the one man that had all this information. Martin had been with Custer and was aware of the division, and he knew the location and the condition of both Custer and Reno. Had Bentine asked Martin for this information, much confusion could have been avoided. To cover both trails, Bentine splits his force. Company D, under the command of Captain Thomas Weir, moves forward on Reno's trail toward Fort A, while Bentine's own Company H and 1st Lieutenant Edward Settle Godfrey's Company K make the right turn and move on Custer's trail toward the bluffs. Bentine, along with his orderly, remains between the two groups and likewise climbs the bluffs. It is around 4:25 that Bentine spots soldiers fleeing in the valley, crossing the river, and climbing the bluffs. At once the battalion converges on the high ground. Bentine arrives on Reno Hill at 4:30 p.m. and asks Reno where Custer was. Reno tells Bentine, "For God's sake, halt your battalion, I have lost half my men." Despite having a written order, not to mention 2 verbal orders from Custer, Benteen decides to halt and render assistance to Reno. Soon after Benteen arrives on Reno Hill, a peculiar thing happens. The large warrior force begins to pull out and move north. Firing from downstream is also heard by the soldiers on Reno Hill. It was clear that General Custer was engaged somewhere to the north. Despite this, Major Reno is more concerned with his missing adjutant, the man that he had left behind in the woods, Second Lieutenant Benjamin Hubert Hodgson. Reno also does not concern himself with the defense on the hill. Instead, he goes down to the retreat crossing to locate Hodgson's body. While Reno is gone for some 20 minutes, Benteen organizes the defenses on the hill, and the men continue to hear firing from the north. Reno returns to the hill at 4:50 p.m. after having located Hodgson's body. The Major needs a new adjutant and chooses 2nd Lieutenant Luther Rector Hare of Company K. By this time, the pack train can be seen in the distance on Reno Creek, so Reno sends Hare off the hill to secure ammunition from the train. 2nd Lieutenant Hare departs Reno Hill at 4:52 p.m., and as you can see, we have Captain McDougall and the pack train arriving on the map. Hare meets the pack train just west of North Fork, secures 2 boxes of ammunition, and begins to return to Reno Hill. The pack train follows. While Lieutenant Hare is off on his assignment, firing can still be heard to the north. The troops on Reno Hill have been sitting there for over 40 minutes now, and there are very few warriors around their position. Captain Thomas Weir, commander of Company D, is tired of waiting. He goes to both Major Reno and Captain Benteen and requests permission to go to the sound of the firing. He is denied by both officers. Disgusted with their lack of action, Weir disobeys their orders and rides off the hill with his orderly at 5:05 p.m. 2nd Lieutenant Winfield Scott Edgerly, the executive officer of Company D, thinking Weir got permission to leave the hill, mounts Company D and follows Weir north toward the sound of the firing. As Weir moves along the bluffs toward Custer, 2nd Lieutenant Hare arrives on Reno Hill with the extra ammunition at 5:12 p.m. Reno immediately dispatches Hare north to locate Captain Weir and to see if he can open up communications with Custer. Hare again departs Reno Hill at 5:15 p.m. At 5:22 p.m., Benteen also decides to leave Reno Hill. He mounts the remainder of his battalion, Company H and Company K, and begins to move to the north. Captain Thomas French, commander of Company M, disgusted with Reno's inaction, also joins Benteen and moves off to the north. So at this point, Reno has lost complete control of everything. In fact, I think it is safe to say that Reno has shown a complete lack of command since he had left the skirmish line some 2 hours earlier. Only Companies A and G are still on the hill, and Company G has lost its commanding officer and almost half its men in the valley. Well, Reno gets some well-needed reinforcements at 5:25 p.m. when Captain McDougall's Company B and the pack train arrives. The entire battalion has over 100 men in it. Also at 5:25 p.m., Captain Weir reaches Weir Point at the northern end of the bluffs, and he and his men look off to the north and observe a smoky battle about 4 miles away. Warriors can be seen firing at objects on the ground. 2nd Lieutenant Hare arrives on Weir Point a few minutes later and quickly realizes communication with Custer is not possible. At 5:35 p.m., Captain Benteen arrives on Weir Point. Seeing the smoky battle in the distance, he thinks Custer has been driven off to the north. As the Custer battle winds down, warriors begin to filter south toward Weir Point in ever-increasing numbers. Captain Benteen looks around, stating, "This is a hell of a place to fight," and readies the troops to depart Weir Point and return to Reno Hill. At 5:50 p.m., Companies D, H, and M pull off of Weir Point and start heading south to Reno Hill. Company K acts as a rear guard, keeping the warriors back at a safe distance. As Benteen nears Reno Hill, he notices Reno has begun to move north with his remaining troops. Finally, Reno has made a command decision and has decided to move along the bluffs to link up with the other units already to the north. Benteen meets Reno and suggests that they all return to Reno Hill, which they do at 6:02 p.m. Company K retreats south along the bluffs, firing at the warriors closing in as they go. During the rearguard action, only one soldier, Farrier Vincent Charlie, is killed. Everyone else in Company K makes it back to the Reno Hill safely at 6:10 p.m. The warriors surround Reno Hill and snipe at the soldiers until it gets dark. And that ends the fighting of June 25, 1876. By the morning of June 26, the warriors have returned and have surrounded Reno Hill. Unlike the Custer battle, the Indians do not assault the hill. Reno has over 300 men with him, the pack train, and he has all of his horses, and the hill itself offers a better defense than any terrain Custer had fought on. The warriors are forced to remain at a distance on the east and west sides of the hill due to the terrain. There is high ground to the north at Sharpshooter Ridge, however, a warrior would have to be a very good long-distance shot to cause any damage there. The south by far was the most vulnerable section of Reno Hill, and in the early morning the warriors make this point. They have crept so close to the hill's southern defenses that they are able to throw clumps of dirt into the position. Benteen knows the warriors have to be driven away. Collecting his own Company H, Benteen leads a charge south off the hill. This scatters the warriors, forcing them to retreat. In the action, 2 soldiers, Private Julian Jones and Private Thomas Metter, are killed, while the Indians lose 1 man, a warrior named Longroad. With the southern part of the hill safe, attention now turns to the northern part of the hill. Company K and Company M were exposed to the Indian fire from Sharpshooter Ridge. One warrior in particular was a very good shot. He wounded and killed several men at the Company M position before finally being either killed or driven off by a well-timed volley by Captain French, Sergeant Ryan, and several soldiers from that company. Later that morning, warriors positioned on a ridge to the east of Reno Hill sniped at the soldiers. Some younger warriors were exposing themselves needlessly, so an older warrior named Dog's Backbone cautioned the younger warriors to be more careful. The soldiers were better shots than they thought. No sooner had he gotten the words out of his mouth than he was shot in the head and killed instantly. By the afternoon, most of the warriors had pulled back and the village was in a clear process of breaking down and moving out. Apparently the Indians had had enough. Reno Hill was secure, and any assault would most likely result in heavy losses. Despite the situation, the soldiers were still suffering. The temperatures for both fighting days had reached into the hundreds, and the water supply had long been exhausted. Most of the men had not even had water for up to 24 hours. The situation was even worse for the wounded. Finally, Dr. Henry Rinaldo Porter went to Bentine and told him that many of the wounded would soon die if they did not get water. Bentine calls for volunteers, and at least 25 men from 6 of the 7 companies answered the call. 4 soldiers acted as sharpshooters, giving cover to the other 21 men that moved down Water Carrier Ravine and got the water. It took several trips to secure enough water for not only the wounded but the entire command, and in the action only 1 soldier, Saddler Michael Madden, was wounded. This action would result in 24 members of the 7th Cavalry being decorated with the Medal of Honor for their actions. There supposedly were warrior casualties as well, but through my research I have not been able to confirm any killed in the action. The water carrier episode is the final major confrontation between the 7th Cavalry and the North American Indian tribes at the Battle of the Little Bighorn. The result in the fighting on the hill had cost the cavalry 18 dead and 69 wounded, while the Indian losses numbered only 4 confirmed killed. Soon after, the warriors pulled out and the village was abandoned. As the exhausted troops watched in disbelief, the Indian force, numbering nearly 10,000, moved south down the Little Bighorn Valley, burning the grass as they went for cover. The soldiers are not sure why the Indians have broken off the attack, that is, until the next day. On June 27, 1876, the army of General Alfred H. Terry and Colonel John Gibbon arrive on the scene. They first discover the Custer dead, then move south and locate the 7th Cavalry survivors under Major Reno and Captain Benteen. The battle is over. The Indians have gotten away, and one of the Army's best and most experienced Indian fighters was gone. Without Custer's services, it would take the Army another year to complete its objective, and when victory came, it would be an incomplete one. Some Indians would escape for some time to come, while others would evade the armies altogether and seek shelter in Canada. In the end, the swift victory and conclusion anticipated by the Army brass in 1876 would drag on for another 14 years, the end result being another human tragedy at Wounded Knee in December 1890. Only then would the end of the conflict come about. Well, that is the end of Part 5. I know it is a lot to take in. Now we are going to move off to the north or left to our final set of maps and continue on with the Battle of the Little Bighorn. This final set of maps will focus on the Custer Battalion's battle with the Indians from Medicine Tail Coulee to the end of the battle in Deep Ravine.